in order to establish this unique community, we have to focus on this type of DNA, okay? Entrepreneurs and startups.
Yeah.
And the second, we actually, once we came to define what will be our KPI, we decided that our main KPI is to make sure that those startups will be successful.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Lomitech, and sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and Birthright Excel. Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Until now, we've had quite a few Israeli entrepreneurs and investors from the Startup Nation. Well, today we're going to dig a little bit deeper and look at the Startup Nation from a different lens. Meet Ofir Dubovi. An active, prolific technology investor in Israel, Ofir is the CEO, founder, board member, and was previously a corporate manager. He served as the CEO of several startups, and until mid-2015, when he turned his vision to expand the Startup Nation boundaries into his full-time job by founding OpenValley, a chain of innovation centers in the northern part of Israel with over 150 startups. OpenValley also established an Academy of Entrepreneurship and Innovation which supports various organizations, corporates, NGOs, governments and municipalities, army units, school chains, and more to implement entrepreneurship tools and methods within their organizations. It's a pleasure having you here, talking about extending the boundary of the Startup Nation. There's so much talk about the Startup Nation and innovation and everything that's happening in between. Yet you're taking just as an important approach at looking more closely at what the Startup Nation actually means, and looking at where there's perhaps opportunities that are missed, people that may have the ability to be part of the Startup Nation, but perhaps due to geographical barriers, they're currently not a part of this amazing ecosystems. And so with OpenValley, you're doing exactly that. But your previous journey is just as fascinating. A director within Amdocs, chief operating officer of NYSE systems, and then an entrepreneur for quite a few years. And so, Ofir, I'm excited to chat with you in these 20 minutes and hear a little bit about your journey and your thesis here.
Okay, so let's start with a short background about myself. So, actually, I grew up in the northern part of Israel, in Haifa. I graduated high school back in '89 and joined the army. And after that, I worked very hard in order to complete my industrial management engineering. And I started my career at the late '90s. Back then it was a high tech boom. It was just previous to 2000. I worked for a company specialized with software testing by the name of Tescom. It doesn't exist anymore. Back then, it was quite a large player in this field. So I spent quite a few years over there. I gained a lot of experience, mainly in managing accounts. And 2001, I relocated with my wife. I was just got married, and we relocated to London. And back then, I managed the operation of this company in Europe. I was based in the UK, and I completed my executive MBA at the London School of Economy. It was a combined program with the London School of Economy and NYU. It was fascinating. I expanding my network. I got to know many interesting people around the world. 2000 and late 2003, we got back to Israel, and I joined Amdocs. I got the opportunity to be part of the team. We established a division at Amdocs and from scratch, and it was a big success. I was specialized in acceptance testing, and this was the main business of the SI division at Amdocs. Later on, I was actually headhunted and joined a NYSE system, and joined and became CEO of part of the operation at NYSE. Back then, NYSE acquired few companies. So I was traveling a lot, really to Ireland. And in late 2007, I joined with two friends of mine back from high school, and we came up with the idea related to data storage business. We draw a presentation of 20 slides, and a very interesting idea. Back then, it was a paradigm shift in the storage business, and we raised money from leading venture capitals, among them Sequoia Capital, Tango, Globespan, and others.
Wow, quite an experience.
Yeah, and it was a roller coaster like any startup, and we were under stealth mode for 3 years, and the company grew very fast. And fast forward in late 2012, a strategic investor joining, I did my personal transaction, and in late 2012, I find myself, in my prime time, looking for something interesting to do. Before that, I moved with my family from the central part of Israel, from Ramat Sharon, and we built a house in a small, beautiful village at the Jezreel Valley, in Israel. Beautiful place called Alunei Abba. And the reason we did that is because my wife and myself, we want to give our children, a different environment, a different kind of education, and different environment, be closer to the ground, to the soil. And moving back to the late 2012, I decided back then that I would like to bring my experience, my knowledge, and also my capabilities to support early stage entrepreneurs with their journey. So I did something back then that was very natural. I commute on a daily basis from my small village in the Jezreel Valley and Israel, to Tel Aviv. Why to Tel Aviv? Again, because back then, approximately 93% of startups were based on a periphery of 12 kilometers in between Herzliya Pituach and the Rothschild Boulevard. Okay, 93% of startups in Israel at any given time, they are between 12,000 to 15,000. And this is, the ecosystem for startups. So I did it quite naturally on almost a daily basis, 10, 12 meetings every day, meetings in the cafe places. But after 6-7 months doing so, and I did quite a few, of course, contacts and investments, as an angel investor. But after doing so on a daily basis, I really got tired because the commute was became impossible after every week. Due to traffic and traffic jams and the public transportation.
So I just want to make sure that I'm recapping correctly where we are until this point. So you find yourself, you're London Business School with NYU. You find yourself in the center of the Israeli ecosystem. You find yourself with some of the most interesting companies that are playing a pivotal role in the Israeli ecosystem, like Amdocs, like NYSE Systems, in leadership positions. So the chief operating officer of NYSE, and then creating a company, which is, every entrepreneur's dream, led with investment rounds led by some of the most phenomenal funds in the world, like Sequoia. So you really are living sort of the entrepreneurial experience. And we're talking also about a time with the proliferation of the entrepreneurial scene in the startup nation. And then when you leave the company after about 5 years, you decide to, with your family, you're moving to a different part of Israel, which is a little calmer. It's not where the startup nation is. It's not where it's centralized. You want a different, perhaps different life qualities for your kids, whether it be connection to the soil, education, etc. But you're finding ways to mitigate your professional life, which is in between Tel Aviv and Herzliya, and your personal life, which is in Emek Yizrael. And then you start understanding that, okay, if I'm away, I can't really participate in this echo chamber because it just doesn't work. And so I need to find a solution for that.
Yeah, in my view, everyone calls us, a startup nation, but in my experience, it's actually startup city. Okay,
Yep.
and for me,
Yep.
it was like an oxymoron, meaning people like myself, and there are tens of thousands of people who are, who decide to come and build their houses and educate their kids in this part of the country. But at the same time, if they would like to become an entrepreneur, they need, to commute. And this is, the acquisition, the balance. So for me, it was, at some point I asked myself, and back then it was like a science fiction question. How come a startup that will be established in the Jezreel Valley will be less successful comparing to a startup that actually established in the Rothschild Boulevard or in other place in Tel Aviv? And for that, and at some point, I'm going back to my story. I changed my, in LinkedIn, my, the fact that I'm meeting people only in my backyard in, the small village where I live. So I continuing conducting those meetings with early stage entrepreneurs, but I did it, at my home. So entrepreneurs who are looking for, for funding, they will commute anywhere. But the fact that I sat, at my home, I was exposed more and more to entrepreneurs from the northern part of Israel, generally, specifically from the Jezreel Valley. And I realized at some point that those one, who live, in the northern part of Israel and managed to gather seed money by my support or by other people support. And once they raise their seed money, they thought, okay, so now we need to consider, future rounds. So we need to the VCs. We need to recruit talent. So they did, again, they took the car and drove to Tel Aviv in order to start.
So, right. So you're saying that we had sort of a solution, but it was short-lived because all it did was delay the inevitable of having to move to the more centralized location. You're just delaying that decision-making process.
And for me, it was really hurting. I mean, then I realized that, the main reason there aren't, a real community for startups in this part of Israel is the fact that we are lacking an ecosystem for them. Okay. And let's talk about ecosystem. How come Tel Aviv became one of the leading ecosystem, for entrepreneurial startups? An ecosystem actually, derived and built from various entities, right? Among them, obviously the financial players, okay, the VCs and the banks, service providers, academy, government, municipals, and all in all, it's about networking. Okay, how you connect between those entities and put them together, to the startups, community, and find, the win-win between those entities and the startups. And this is exactly what I started to do back then with a group of people. We start to establish a community and meet on a monthly basis for meetups, in the area. And for each and every meetup, I invited an entrepreneur, to talk about the success, about the failures. People came and talk about their idea and look for a co-founder, look for feedbacks, like what you do in any other meetup. But the community started to establish, and for one meetings to another, there were more and more people joining. Eventually, hundreds of people, all from all over the area came in order to participate in those meetups. So I realized, that there is enough, talents and raw material in this area in order to act and move to the next stage. And at this point, I decided I would like to take it, one step further, and so establish a place that will gather all of those entrepreneurs and support them, with the endeavor of establishing their own startup. But I realized that, that for that I will need we need to invest a lot. I will need to, to put the contacts and build the ecosystem. So I looked for a co-founder, someone that can help me and support me, with this dream, okay, with this vision. And long story short, I was lucky enough, to knock on the door of a veteran in the Israeli industry and market. And he lives a village across mine in Bethlehem Galilee. And his name is Yossi Ackerman. Yossi Ackerman he's a true leader. He was the CEO and president of Elbit Systems for almost 20 years. And he made Elbit a leading player in its field. And for many years, he was recognized as the most admired CEO in Israel. And he's really a unique person. And I knocked on his door. I didn't know him personally. I just knew about him. And I got his contact, and I did a cold call. I came and talked to him, and I was very, excited. And I came with my pitch. And after 2 sentences about my dream, Yossi stopped me and said, "Ofir, I'm in. I'm in because I really I feel the same way. I really feel that we need to create this type of community here. I see all of the young people, all of the entrepreneurs, they're running, Tel Aviv in order to establish their own products. So let's start to do some impact around here." And Yossi, the north of Israel and the Jezreel Valley always was very important for him. He, throughout his career, he developed, the northern part of Israel with Elbit, facilities and factories and offices all over. And in January 2016, we established our first branch of OpenValley in Ramat Yishai, which is in the heart of the Jezreel Valley. And we decided 2 main, rules for us. First of all, that the inhabitant of OpenValley will be entrepreneurs and startups. OpenValley is not a real estate business, okay? Unlike any other very known co-working spaces that are mainly based on real estate, OpenValley is a house of entrepreneurs and startups, okay? And at the beginning, many, businesses knocked on our door, asked for a small office, but we really insisted to both only entrepreneurs and startups. And we made a lot of research, and I personally, I commute all of the notes in order to collect them and bring them to OpenValley. And
just so that, why have that barrier? Why not allow others to join? The companies that aren't early stage startups?
Because we realized that in order for us to establish a community for entrepreneurs and startups, we really need to, to gather them together, all kinds of startups, by the way, who are dealing with entrepreneurship, okay, and not necessarily technological, although the most of our, startups, and today we have more than 150 startups, in our chain are basically technological startups. But we realized that in order to establish this unique community, we have to focus on this type of DNA, okay? Entrepreneurs and startups.
Yeah.
And the second, we actually, once we came to define what will be our KPI, we decided that our main KPI is to make sure that those startups will be successful. That's mean our mindset, our efforts, our contact, our networking, and also our money were, focused toward those startups. So we sat down with them. We supported them with all the main activities, board meetings, and we start to look for investments for ourselves. And throughout the time, once we established more and more branches, after Ramat Yishai, we established a very large branch in Zaria, Kesaria, and later in Yokneam, and just recently in Ramat HaGolan, And in a few months, hopefully, we'll establish our first location south to Tel Aviv in Ashdod. And we have many potential locations.
Wow.
So for us, it was mainly a focus to establish the ecosystem, but by putting together those entities that I mentioned, together with the startups and support them, not only with funding from us and others, but also with expanding, open themselves to markets, to potential customers, and all kinds support the startup actually.
Incredible. Well, the natural next step is to have an institutional fund, because you're seeing them on the day to day, and you can follow them for months and be a leading investor in the ecosystem of anything outside of the Tel Aviv Herzliya area, which other VCs don't have. They just don't have that interaction today. So it sounds like an amazing natural progression. But beyond that, it sounds like you're very fulfilled with what you do, with the mission that you're on, with the journey that you're
actually,
on.
OpenValley is not an NGO. It's we are an LTD company where we're based on business rules, and while the time this is part of our evolution. We build few layers to our business, so we do have the layer of like any other co-working space of the real estate part. But the top of it, we also establish an academy for innovation and entrepreneurship, because once we put together, the ecosystem around us with startups, the ecosystem around us, which means, the industry, the corporates, the government, municipals, NGOs came and approach us and ask our support to help them to develop their own entrepreneurship. Any CEO today, and it doesn't matter if it's technology, based on technology, or a traditional industry, or NGO, or a military unit, or a government office. They really considering how they will be down the road in 3-4 years, unless they will be innovative. So we've been asked by the ecosystem around us to develop, and to help them to develop an entrepreneurship, tools within the organization. So OpenValley, 4 or 5 years ago, established an academy for innovation. So we support both corporates, government, municipals, defense, and also high schools all around Israel, together with the old high school chain and Ruach HaGolan and many other. They developed a program, a 6 years program for high schools, student for entrepreneurship and innovation, and all of that. And all of this, I consider part of establishing the ecosystem, because once we support our ecosystem to becoming innovative, so at the end of the day, we are changing, and we're impacting our surrounding. And we put together all the time the contacts between our startups and the industry. It's very, very important for them. And we do scouting for many corporates, and put them in touch with startups among, OpenValley. So our day-to-day is mainly how to establish, develop, the ecosystem surrounding the places that we decide to invest.
Well, I think that what I love most about this journey is that the way that it impacted you personally, the personal convictions you've had, and how it sounds like you were discovering sort of this product market fit between what you're excited about, and then having an actual impact on an ecosystem, and you really are creating communities that need to be there, and I'm curious to see how over the years we'll see the centralization of Tel Aviv and Herzliya adapting to this to all these new ecosystems, whether they'll be different ecosystems, whether they'll be integrated as a part of the startup nation, or whether they may be their own startup scenes, with the new world where geographical limits are a little bit less relevant. I think that maybe you can even equate it to something like Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, and Austin, Texas, right? Sort of like a similar idea where you're creating these new centralized hubs of innovation where they obviously work together. You have perhaps even offices in both locations, but you realize that people want to have different forms of life and different ways of life. And so it's a very interesting question. And Ofir, I really want to thank you for coming here and sharing this journey with me. I love the transitions and the personal convictions and the unapologetic nature of how you're going about this and thinking through these issues. So thank you very much. Continue making a really positive impact on so many people. And I'm sure that all of these startups are so thankful to have this space and that you really are changing the landscape wherever you are. So thank you and best of luck with
Michael.
OpenValley.
It was a real pleasure, and I hope you'll come to visit us next time you're here in Israel.
100% I will. Thank you very much.